Trophy is passed into the hands of genius. And in 2022, the world champions are Argentina.
The World Cup is supposed to be the ultimate celebration of football. A month-long festival that unites nations, inspires generations, and puts the host country on the global stage. But behind the spectacle lies a more uncomfortable truth. For host nations, the World Cup frequently turns into a financial burden. For context, recent totals have ranged from the low billions to the hundreds of billions. Qatar reportedly spent around $220 billion, while Brazil's bill was between $15 and $20 billion. One pattern has emerged across tournaments. FIFA captures the lion's share of revenues from broadcasting, sponsorships, and tickets, while host governments typically cover stadium construction, infrastructure upgrades, and massive security costs. In other words, the prestige that cities fight for often comes with a very high price tag. And that tension only becomes clearer when you look at what hosting really requires. The hidden price tag of prestige. Cities around the world compete fiercely for the chance to host the World Cup.
And FIFA announced that 16 North American cities will host the 2026 World Cup. The games played across the US, Mexico, and Canada.
Drawn by the promise of global prestige and the hope of lasting rewards. The event is often sold as a golden opportunity. Jobs, visitors, heightened visibility, all wrapped in assurances that it will more than pay for itself. The reality on the balance sheet looks very different. Industry projections for the 2023 to 2026 cycle put FIFA's revenue around $11 billion, a record. But that windfall accrues to FIFA, not the cities doing the heavy lifting. FIFA now retains most broadcast, sponsorship, ticket, and merchandising revenue, while host governments cover security, transportation, and infrastructure, a shift that research identifies as decisive. The imbalance is clear. Record profits for FIFA set against mounting bills for host cities. Vancouver illustrates the problem with striking numbers. The province's original estimate came to about $240 million. As planning advanced and requirements tightened, that figure ballooned to between $532 million Canadian dollars and $624 million, all for 7 matches. 7 games amounting to just over 10 hours of football, yet taxpayers face bills that rival the construction of a new major hospital. The escalation highlights how expectations and actual costs can drift apart, leaving the public to bridge the gap. Even cities that already appear well prepared aren't immune. Los Angeles, for example, has an existing world-class stadium, tourism infrastructure, and airport access. On paper, those advantages suggest lower costs. In practice, municipal and state spending tends to rise anyway. Host obligations expand through layers of added security, updated transportation logistics, designated fan zones, and sponsor-specific infrastructure. What looks like adequate preparation at the start becomes insufficient over time, because every new planning phase brings additional expenses. The result is that even in highly developed markets, costs still grow well beyond projections. There's also the issue of tax treatment. Hosts often grant FIFA and its sponsors exemptions from local taxation. In Brazil, for example, the National Tax Authority estimated foregone revenues at roughly $250 million during the 2014 World Cup. While local businesses may experience short bursts of activity, major revenue streams bypass city treasuries altogether. For taxpayers, the supposed upside can shrink to almost nothing once exemptions, inflated budgets, and FIFA's retained earnings are factored in. What begins as a bid for recognition can end up functioning more like a subsidy to the richest sports organization on the planet. City leaders accept these deals out of fear of missing out on the world stage, while citizens shoulder the burden. So who really benefits, and who pays the tab? To learn the answer, it helps to look backward. History offers an unmistakable pattern, one that challenges the promises made each time a tournament is awarded. The warnings from history. To understand what's at stake, it helps to look at recent hosts. 3 tournaments stand out as clear warnings: South Africa in 2010, Brazil in 2014, and Qatar in 2022. Each event was packaged as a chance for transformation, but the financial and social aftermaths told a very different story. Take Brazil in 2014. Official government figures put the cost of hosting at roughly $11.6 billion, already the highest ever at that point. But independent estimates later climbed toward $15 to $20 billion once overruns were accounted for. Stadium spending became the most visible symbol of waste. The Arena de Amazonia in Manaus cost about $325 million, staged just 4 World Cup matches, and now sees only lower-tier games in a city without a major club. In Brasilia, the Estadio Nacional Mané Garrincha cost roughly $900 million, tripling its original budget, yet the capital has no top-level team to fill the seats. Brazilians labeled these facilities white elephants, monuments to spending that offered little return. The human cost was severe as well. Large numbers of residents were displaced to clear land and make way for infrastructure projects. Estimates vary widely, but some independent reports cited hundreds of thousands of people affected. In Rio de Janeiro, families were forcibly evicted, some at gunpoint, and moved far from their original neighborhoods. The resentment boiled over during the tournament. Mass protests filled city streets, highlighting collapsing public services, while billions were funneled into stadiums and security. Brazil's government spent about $1 billion on security operations alone, including militarized patrols during matches. Clashes between police and demonstrators escalated to tear gas, rubber bullets, and arrests. What was meant to be a global showcase became a flashpoint for national frustration. South Africa in 2010 follows the same pattern on a smaller scale. The country directed around $3.6 billion towards stadiums and related upgrades, with the aim of boosting tourism and signaling its emergence as a global player. But more than a decade later, the dividends have been slim. Several venues are now underused and expensive to maintain. Municipal governments are left paying to keep them open, even when crowds are scarce. The expectation that the World Cup would generate sustained economic growth or permanent tourism gains simply never materialized. Then came Qatar in 2022, which shattered all records by pouring an estimated $220 billion into the event. That total included not only stadiums, but also metro systems, airports, and new neighborhoods, making it by far the most expensive sporting event in history. This immense outlay was paired with controversy. Journalistic investigations and NGO reports documented harsh treatment of migrant workers, with accounts of dangerous heat, cramped housing, and limited protections. Some investigations linked thousands of deaths to construction work since Qatar was awarded the Cup in 2010. Official Qatari figures and international agencies disputed how many of those fatalities could be directly attributed to the tournament, but the criticism was enough to dominate international coverage. The event became as much about human rights scrutiny as it was about football. Across these cases, the pattern repeats. Giant public expenses, projects that rarely sustain themselves, and revenue streams that bypass host nations almost entirely. That pattern now hangs over the next tournament, which will test whether the largest World Cup ever can avoid the same pitfalls. The stakes for North America. The next World Cup raises the stakes in a way no host has faced before. The 2026 tournament will be the first with 48 teams, and the first jointly hosted by 3 countries. The distribution is clear: 60 matches in the United States, 10 in Canada, and 10 in Mexico. That scale makes the event larger than anything FIFA has run, and it also spreads both risks and costs across 3 nations. On the surface, this looks like shared responsibility, but in practice each country still faces its own political and financial test. For Canada, the spotlight falls on Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto is expected to host fewer matches, while Vancouver gets 7. Even with that modest schedule, costs have surged. As government estimates for Vancouver's share climbed to between $532 million and $624 million, critics warned that a handful of matches could still impose huge public costs. That's less than 10 games, yet taxpayers pick up a bill big enough to fund major long-term projects that would actually serve residents. The exposure is narrow, but the fiscal commitment is national. And the risk is that voters won't see anything close to fair value in return. Mexico will have a similarly limited role. Hosting 10 matches across Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey concentrates activity in just 3 cities. Local businesses near the stadiums may see a short-term boost, but nationwide taxpayers will shoulder the costs for security, logistics, and infrastructure investment. That uneven balance, concentrated benefits, diffused burdens, is a common feature of mega events, and in Mexico the gap will be especially easy for critics to point out. The entire country helps pay, but only a handful of communities get direct visibility. The United States carries both the majority of the games and the largest set of obligations. 60 matches, including the final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, place huge demands on dozens of state and city governments. Security and interagency coordination costs are expected to be high, spread across multiple jurisdictions. Immigration policy and political debates around border enforcement add another layer of sensitivity. For government officials, this brings a reputational risk. If costs balloon or security failures occur, the blame falls on public institutions, not FIFA. The economic promises are ambitious. The United bid projected around $5 billion in short-term economic activity, 40,000 jobs, over $1 billion in worker earnings, and more than $2 billion in ticket sales. These numbers helped sell the bid to voters and international backers, but academic reviews of past tournaments consistently find such estimates inflated. Crowding out effects mean visitors who might have traveled anyway avoid host cities during the event. Substitution effects lead to shifts rather than net gains in local spending, and much of the revenue leaks out of the local economy altogether. The picture that looks so profitable in a bid document rarely materializes after the final whistle. For Canadian viewers especially, one question cuts through all of the marketing. Why spend hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars for fewer than 10 matches? That's the kind of trade-off provincial governments are making today. It's also a reminder that the World Cup may promise prestige, but the bill is real, and often far heavier than advertised. Which leads to the bigger issue. What is the tournament actually delivering, and who is left carrying the cost? In short, the World Cup often shifts the financial upside to FIFA, while leaving host nations with most of the costs and long-term obligations, a pattern documented across multiple tournaments.
To speak to you, ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about football, this has nothing to do with football.
Hosts like South Africa spent several billion on stadiums and infrastructure, while FIFA's direct contributions covered only a small fraction of that public investment. For Canadians heading into 2026, the core demand should be clear: transparency and rigorous cost-benefit analysis before governments sign over taxpayer money. If you were a provincial budget watchdog in Vancouver or Toronto, what would you demand before approving more spending? A public referendum, an independent cost-benefit audit, or something else? Tell us in the comments. Hosting can deliver pride, but it shouldn't deliver decades of debt. Demand the math before the bid.